Guten Tag, herzlich willkommen.
Good day and welcome, bienvenue at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. I'm Tanja Samrotzki and I'm very pleased to be able to facilitate this afternoon. Ready, steady, go. In German, it sounds a bit dusty and old, some youth athletic championship, but ready, steady, go in English sounds very dynamic. A European dynamics. In 4 days' time, you all know, we will launch the conference on the future of Europe, which is a European-wide dialogue for citizens of Europe, where Europeans can talk about a vision or develop a future Europe, a vision for a future Europe. And in a time where, due to the pandemic, we are witnessing a worldwide gap or a stop, I think this is maybe a starting point to get started. And for the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, today is the right time to look at our future Europe. And our host will take a first look, Professor Dr. Norbert Lammert, Chairman of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, who is known to be a very good speaker. Well, you have now raised the bar. But Europe, of course, is a big task and a challenging one at that. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you all from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation here in Berlin. I'm looking forward to talking to you, and I'm happy about your interest in the future of Europe. I'd like to be a bit more cautious. I'm happy about you interested in the conference on the future of Europe that is about to start. And it seems we've said everything about Europe already. All pleasantries have been exchanged, all less pleasant exchanges have been made as well. And the longer this historic achievement lasts, that this democratic state union of states, of freedom, the more we take them all for granted. Especially for the large majority of people who have never known anything but peaceful conditions as we have them now in Europe. A Europe without borders, without mobility, with the right to go anywhere, live anywhere, and work anywhere within this union of states without needing a special permit or without anyone being rejected this right. It is exactly 200 days to this day that 200 years, I'm sorry, that Napoleon Bonaparte died. He died banished on the island of St. Helena. He was an outstanding representative of the old Europe, a Europe where the enormous changes that did take place, no doubt, but they didn't just take place with the subtle means of diplomacy, but rather using power, tangible power, military force. Nowadays, we live in a Europe where the huge changes happen as a result of negotiations and treaties and agreements, or do not happen because of that, because we have said goodbye to former ways of change after having learned the lessons of history. The last attempt to create a common vision for the future of this community of states happened pretty much exactly 20 years ago, when there was an attempt to create a constitution for our community of states, which this approach failed, or this attempt failed. And this is no small matter. This happened after a text had actually been drafted carefully with a lot of effort. But none and all of the member states actually ratified it in their own national parliaments, but rather, no, it was two founding states of the European Union that actually had referendums in which this text then failed. This new approach that we're taking, this new attempt that we want to take is more modest. And it bears in mind that in the past 20 years, in the time since our last attempt, the necessity to further intensify and strengthen European cooperation has grown further. The number of problems that can be solved nationally alone can be added to that, but the necessity to act European is greater than it was before. But whether we have a greater willingness for European solutions than 20 years ago, that is one of the core questions that we need to ask ourselves in a very sober and self-critical manner. And this is what the conference will give a framework to. And I'm very happy that this event of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation can serve as a starting point for this joint reflection. And I would like to thank Professor Simon, Diana Kinnert, and Hans-Gert Pöttering, who will give us their own perspectives and tell us about their own experiences and engage in a dialogue. And the one thing I think that will connect us all in this discussion is that the process that we are about to start in the days to come will not be a comfortable one. It will be stressful. It will be challenging. But the project that it is about deserves all the effort that we can possibly make. So, there you go, Mr. Samrotzki. Oh, thank you so much, Mr. Lammert. You already have a decisive question, a crucial question for our discussion. I don't think I have promised enough. A conference on the future of Europe, I think, is a collective reflection process that makes the citizens of Europe visible as who they are, those who shape Europe, who give Europe a shape. And why this participation is so important, we will hear her perspective. We will hear Dr. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission. She's going to tell us about her very personal dream. Dear Norbert Lammert, ladies and gentlemen, when we think about the future of Europe, we all have a dream. Robert Schuman, one of the founding fathers of our European Union, dreamed of peace, as did so many in his generation. In order for peace to have a real chance, he wrote on May 9th, 1950, in the preface of the declaration that still bears his name today, I quote, "For peace to really have a chance, there must, first of all, be one Europe," unquote. A Europe that is at peace with itself and its neighbours. That's what we have achieved. And at the same time, we are facing enormous new challenges. Climate change, unrestrained, has the destructiveness of wars. When I think about the future of Europe today, I envision a Europe that is serious about fighting climate change, and that sets standards accordingly. A Europe that uses its huge potential to bequeath the children of this world a planet worth living on. A Europe that can deprive pandemics of their breeding grounds. A Europe that agrees on a common migration policy. A Europe that helps people in need. A digital Europe whose democracies are not impressed by fake news, and which remains a strong and reliable voice of reason, in an increasingly confusing global environment. In the coming months, we want to learn more about the dreams, but also the concrete wishes of the 450 million Europeans. In a few days, on Europe Day, the day of the Schuman Declaration, we will officially launch the Conference on the Future of Europe with a ceremony in Strasbourg. The message from our citizens is clear. They want to have a greater say and be more involved in shaping the future. In one of the most recent Eurobarometer surveys, a staggering 92% across all member states are calling for this. Therefore, our promise today is just as clear. We will listen, and wherever possible, we will act in the interest of the people. For democracy thrives on the commitment and participation of citizens, and not only every 4 or 5 years, when elections are held, but rather at all times. The last months have shown how strong Europe can be if it sticks together, and if it has the necessary competences for decisive action. With Next Generation EU, we are launching a reconstruction plan, the likes of which Europe has never seen before. In total, we want to invest 1.8 trillion euros over the next few years to emerge from this crisis stronger together. Stronger, greener, more digital, and more resilient. At the same time, the pandemic has shown us, at least initially, how difficult it is for Europe to act when it is disunited and when there is a lack of clear responsibilities. You will remember, solidarity and public spirit only slowly took the place of closed borders and national export bans on medical equipment. Today, I think it is clear to everyone that going it alone against the virus will not help, and that it was right to jointly order vaccines for the whole of Europe, for the smaller member states as well as for the big ones. In the future, we want to be better positioned for crises like COVID-19 right from the start. And that is why we want to expand the European Union into a health union. And we want to talk to citizens about that too. Europe's diversity is unique, and that is its strength. So it is important to me that the Conference on the Future of Europe should reflect this diversity, because the conference is better and more effective the more citizens participate in it, and of course the more diverse the perspectives they bring to it. We want to hear from young and old, from Erasmus students, and from those who are taking part in the Pulse of Europe demonstrations. But we also want to hear from those who are more critical with regard to Europe. We want to hear from everyone. The starting point for our discussions is an online platform that went live just over 2 weeks ago. On this platform, citizens from all over Europe can exchange their ideas in 24 languages, around the clock and in full transparency. And a look at the discussion in the first few days shows just how great and how diverse these interests are. Europe's citizens discuss the European Union's relations with China. School children are producing video clips with examples of how to get involved in climate protection. And people in border regions are exchanging views on how their coexistence could work even more smoothly in the future. And that's just a start, because of course, once the pandemic will allow, there will be face-to-face meetings again too. Ladies and gentlemen, one thing still holds as true today as it did in the days of Robert Schuman. When it comes to Europe, there is no effort too great and no dream too bold. And in this spirit, I would like to wish us all many lively debates over the coming months. And today already an exciting discussion with you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ursula von der Leyen. We are looking forward to seeing her in person again next time. Ursula von der Leyen quoted one of the founding fathers of the European Union, Robert Schuman. That's the basis on which we all stand and from which we all look forward. To introduce our panel, or to get started with our panel, we would like to introduce you to young Europeans who might be one day quoted by presidents of the European Commissions. People from Sweden, Portugal, Bulgaria. 4 MEPs, 4 minutes.
Well, I expect to see European policy.
Ich erwarte europäische
Politicians who listen and listen carefully, and not only to the majorities, but also to specific, smaller and sometimes weaker citizens' voices. What I don't expect is for us to hold a theoretical discussion on the merits of the European integration. What we need is to find a very few practical and substantial subjects that will interest people and make them excited to share their opinion.
I really hope to see a union that manages to prioritize what is crucial, that makes sure that we can play a stabilizing role in an unstable world, that can show the rest of the world that a greener society is compatible with economic prosperity, that is equipped to deal with common problems such as migration, terrorism and international crime.
I will be glad to participate as a member of European Parliament, but also as a citizen among many others that find Europe still a decisive project to try to reinforce our countries in the world, but who fear that our weaknesses of today could weaken the European project as a whole.
As a member of the European Parliament, I will be following closely the discussion on the legacy we leave for our younger and future generations. Both climate change or the economic crisis that we are living now will have a huge impact on the lives of younger people, and I will make sure that they are also represented in the discussion on how Europe will look like in the future. After all, the future belongs to them, right?
I hope that it will end in a new framework of European cooperation that makes sure that we are not only equipped for the challenges of today, but also for tomorrow. To make sure that we are united and strong where we need to be, but to protect the national uniqueness and to find ways that we can exchange best practice between the member states.
A lot more can be achieved if there is political willingness from all stakeholders to do so. However, I would choose the full commitment for a European Health Union and establishment of a fund, similar to the Just Transition Fund, that will be applied towards the mitigation and adaptation of today's impacts of climate change.
I think that the EU should be, in my best dreams, a place in which every citizen knows that with the diversity of our cultures, we share a common civilization, and that this common civilization creates between us a link that binds us for the future. We are today again not able to speak out clearly about who we are and about what we want, and this European Union, respecting the democracy in each of the member states, would be, in my dreams, the place where we find leverage to reinforce each other so that we can continue to write our own history and not only see it happen without us.
Well, speaking about dreams, I think a very successful conference and the way Europe should look into the future is by making sure that Europeans want to dream big in Europe and realize their dreams here in Europe, so that the next generation of Europeans, or our kids, and mine you could have certainly heard here in the background, would be happy Europeans. They would live in a prosperous, secure continent that gives you plenty of opportunities.
Dear
guests, if we were in one room, then you would have noticed one thing that I just noticed myself. Professor Sven Simon, one of the panelists, was smiling when he recognized and saw his colleague from the European Parliament. That is nice. You sort of connected with her. Now, we just heard Eva Maydell, the Bulgarian MEP, that sort of set the framework. And at the beginning, she said a thing that I understand kind of a task, a mission for our discussion today. She said what she expects from the conference: concrete, practical issues instead of theoretical discussions about the achievements of integration. So this is kind of a mission also for our panel discussion, where we have three different generations represented: Diana Kinnert, Sven Simon, and Hans-Gert Pöttering. Welcome to all of you. Now, let me introduce the panelists. So Hans-Gert Pöttering is sitting next to me. For 35 years, he was a member of the European Parliament. You know him as the former president of the European Parliament, as a long-year chair of the EVP, and he's also was a long-year chair of the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation. Today, he is the chair of the Association of Former MEPs, so obviously he's very committed to this, as we can see from this. And Mr. Pöttering wants me to say also that this membership doesn't happen automatically. You have to pay 100 euros of an annual fee to become member of this club. Then Dr. Sven Simon, he is already saving money for this annual fee. So Professor Sven Simon, 2 years ago, was elected to the European Parliament. Interesting in your CV, Mr. Simon, that you represented your community and your local parliament for a long period of time. So when you talk about subsidiarity, you really know what you're talking about. You studied in Warwick, Tel Aviv, and in New York. You wrote a doctoral thesis on the European integration process, and he teaches international law in Marburg. But he became a European much earlier, i.e. when he traveled along the European coast together with his parents. And that was the time when he felt that Europe is nice and that he's part of it. And then Diana Kinnert, she is a journalist, an entrepreneur, and also a policymaker. And when I wrote the CVs, I noticed that Mr. Pöttering is so much older. Yet Ms. Kinnert's CV is longer, because she has so many different positions. She is in the Commission of the CDU for Social Cohesion. She's part of the Federal Network of Integration. She set up the council, the Young Council of the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, and she runs a news platform for green innovation. And she also writes books. Her pledge for modern conservatism was published in May 2017, and she has a broad audience. She studied politics and philosophy in Amsterdam and other universities, and there she had kind of a European awakening experience during a party that was a very diverse European group, and there was one guest also from China, and he asked, for whatever reason, why people take to the streets in Europe where governments take care of everything. And that was the moment when Diana Kinnert and her European friends noticed, wait a minute, despite all diversity, there is something that unites us. That is what counts. Thank you very much for being here. I'm very happy to have you here. We have about 45 minutes for discussion, and we would like to focus on 3 different chapters. I mean, everybody would like to know sort of where the journey goes. So at the beginning, we would like to shed light on room for improvement. Where do we have to act and why now? And of course, I'm looking forward to hearing your dreams and priorities. And at the end of the discussion, we have to ask ourselves, what does this mean for Europe's structures? How can we translate this into action? So let us start with the need for action. And this also includes the conference on the future of Europe. Dr. Simon, maybe you can briefly tell us What is so special about this conference? Maybe not everybody has heard about it yet. And why is it so important at the moment? I think the conference is important at the moment because we are sort of at a crossroads. If you take a look at the European Union, then, well, at the beginning, we also wanted to talk a little bit about the past. Then, of course, this is a huge success story. Freedom, peace, prosperity. This is really unique for such a long period of time in Europe. On the other hand, after 3 crises, starting with the Euro crisis, then we had the migration issue, now the pandemic. So we have noticed that the European Union in certain political areas is not really ready to act or cannot act enough. And this, of course, triggers huge expectations with the European citizens. But contracts and agreements are often limited, so the European Union cannot act everywhere. So it is the right point now to start acting. I mean, it is very good that the conference is happening now. President Macron suggested it at first, and it is correct what he said. Basically, he is talking about the sovereignty of Europeans. I normally talk about the ability to act of the EU. And after the pandemic, it is the right time to fundamentally ask ourselves, where are unmet needs? And as Mr. Lammert said it, where is readiness for more European cohesion and cooperation in order to increase our ability to act? When Macron made his suggestion, that was in 2019, that was the year when you became an MEP, and you said that at the beginning you had a reality shock. What shocked you at the time? Well, this of course has to do with what you said earlier, that I come from the academic world. For 20 years I have been doing politics on a voluntary basis. And then also in the European Parliament, I noticed things that could be improved. And we are working on this, and we have already made progress. For instance, the way how plenary sessions work. I was shocked at this. I was shocked that the plenary hall is mostly empty. You can only make 1-minute statements, and there's no real debate. And that was kind of a practice shock. But the reason was that I wasn't a professional policymaker at the time. Mr. Pöttering, your practice shock is probably longer ago. I don't even know if you had one. But the former members of parliament whose association you chair also look into Europe's future, and you have set up your own reflection group on this. So what drives you most? You being the ones who know the EU best and longest, so where do you see room for improvement? Well, it's very important, and Norbert Lammert mentioned it, to see that 200 years ago Napoleon died. Consequently, it is important, if we look into the future, that we know where we come from. And if in a few days, on May 9th, Ursula von der Leyen mentioned it, we have a ceremonial act in Strasbourg. Unfortunately, not everybody can participate, and the conference on the future of Europe will be open then. And this reminds us of Robert Schuman. And the European idea, as presented by Robert Schuman, was an idea saying that the people that are part of the European community should live in peace. We should be a community of law. That is crucial for the future. We, the European Union, and Francois Bellamy talked about our civilization. I would like to talk about the community of values, which is based on human dignity, on democracy, on the rule of law, on peace and freedom. And everything that we want to achieve has to be based on these values. And now we have to defend these values in the EU, internally and externally. So one of the priorities, in addition to fighting climate change, in addition to fostering digitization, that we have a common security and defense policy. We have to develop this stronger than we have done so far, because only if we act together and in unity will we be able to defend our values. Everything is closely intertwined, and this sort of guarantees a good future. At least I am convinced of this. And former MEPs want to make their contribution. It might be modest, but they still want to make a contribution. Okay, let me ask you. You were talking about values. It automatically sounds a bit old-fashioned. It's kind of a dusty term when you say it in German, Werte, but we have seen that our values, my generation, 50 plus, were something that we took for granted, and all of a sudden they cannot be taken for granted anymore. So it is something traditional, but it is also something that now has to be redefended, especially as we see that we have competing systems nowadays. Yes, absolutely. Every generation has their own challenges to confront and master. It doesn't make any sense to look back and say everything was better in the past. No, not everything was better in the past. We had world wars, and this is something that we definitely want to prevent from happening again in the future. So states and regimes that are authoritarian or even totalitarian, and I can give you countries. China is authoritarian. China is authoritarian, if not totalitarian. So we cannot say nothing makes sense. No, we have to show self-confidence when it comes to defending our civilization and our values vis-à-vis those that challenge them. And I'm pretty confident if we strike the right balance between self-confidence and humility, determination, and if we also know that we cannot create paradise on Earth, that we have a good chance to defend this civilization and values. Civilization, defend civilization. I tried to build a bridge to you, Ms. Kinnert, but I would like to talk about values of young people. And they just got backed by the jurisdiction of the Federal Constitutional Court on climate policy. The court said there is a right to future chances and opportunities. The focus was on climate, but I think you can translate this argumentation also to other policy areas. So one value of the EU has to be that the future generations and their needs will be taken into account. So what could be improved from your perspective? Well, I think that the judgment of the Federal Constitutional Court is very exciting because it shows that old policy and old political patterns will not just perpetuate, because young generations with different lifestyles, with different phenomena, are confronted with totally new challenges. And I think you can only find a solution for this if you notice that political responsibilities and paths have to change. And I think this can be translated into different areas and challenges. When it comes to citizens' rights in the area of digitization, we still rely upon private corporations that are not headquartered in Europe. In Germany or in the different member states of the EU, we do not have a unanimous solution in terms of how to deal with citizens' rights in digitization. Full automation is something that we are confronted with very soon. It's no longer just about infrastructure connection and prosperity. It is also something where we have to see whether all jobs will be protected. And I think this self-assertion is something that we have to bear in mind in all generations. All generations, good buzzword. Interesting difference here between the panelists, but this is also part of the conference, of the idea of the conference, that all generations are considered, to get a broad idea. Yeah, this is exactly what Ms. von der Leyen mentioned, that there's a digital platform where you can participate 24/7, and I think this is the biggest challenge. But digitization has actually helped us because we want to figure out how do people think, what is their mindsets. And it will not always be highly reflected, yet it is still interesting because your own communication, your own behavior as a policy maker is what we have to focus on. I mean, nowadays, we frequently discuss in our own bubbles. Also here today, I mean, fortunately, we managed to have a few European colleagues that are attending this conference, and at least to make a statement. But it would be much nicer if we had a European debate. It seems to be much easier nowadays, and we really have to make this happen so that everybody has the impression that they can make an input. The big risk is, of course, that there will be disappointments if things are not translated immediately into practice, which is not possible, of course. And the conference will, at the end of the day, only be a participation platform. Decisions have to be made by the parliaments, the European Parliament and the national parliaments. Okay, responsibility is a good buzzword, also with regards to future generations. The judgment of the Federal Constitutional Court is far-reaching, is very significant. And if we translate this, not just with regards to the climate challenge, but also with regards to material chances and prosperity, where do you see room for improvement in the EU, Ms. Kinnert? Do we consider young people enough? I was born in 1991, so the GDR is history for me. So I can not really remember the day when Napoleon died. So I think it is important to know that there is a generation, a young generation out there that knows prosperity and peace, but they take this for granted. And the freedom of movement and Erasmus study programs are also taken for granted. So we have to ask ourselves, what does this mean? We have to illustrate this. I think we need incentives that have to be filled with life based on European cooperation. An Erasmus program for young founders in Europe, for instance, so that a young startup from Scandinavia can also go to Portugal or to Austria, and that you can have an exchange there. And these specific exchange platforms are important for young people to understand that cooperation doesn't just work on the single market, but that it is something that we all benefit from. Mr. Pöttering, when listening to Ms. Kinnert, does this ring a bell with you? And what about the Federal Constitutional Court's judgment? Do you think about young people? Yes, of course. And it's wonderful that we have different generations here, kind of an intergenerational dialogue. And I'm representing the oldest generation here, obviously. Often in the European Union, we have the perception of pessimism. So for many people, the glasses often have empty. But I am one who says the glass is half full. And I hope that the European Union and the people living in it, that despite all deficits, despite all crises, I prefer to talk about challenges that we are confronted with now and in the future. And I want us to master these challenges with full confidence. And nobody actually knows it. Hardly anybody knows it, that it was the European Union to adopt the first climate legislation. Allow me to point out that on the 21st of April 2009, I signed the first climate legislation with the then Czech presidency. So reduction of CO2 emissions by 20%, renewable energy increase by 20% until 2020. So we as the European Union took leadership. I mean, at the time, nothing was perfect. Well, then again, nothing is perfect in this world. This is why we have to continue to embark upon this path, and that the Federal Constitutional Court told us to do exactly that is challenging for policymakers. So I'm totally with Ms. Kinnert. The future is based on what we have done so far.
You already mentioned climate. There are other aspects as well, and I'm looking forward to hear more about your personal priorities in a bit. And to begin, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to show you a small video, not MPs, but just young people from Europe who tell us about their hopes and dreams and expectations towards Europe and the European Union.
Moi, my name is Elina. I'm 39 years old and I live in Helsinki, Finland. I'm a member of parliament and the vice chair of my party, Kokoomus EPP. For me as a Finn, the European Union is a door to a European community of shared values and human rights.
Kalimera σας. I'm Ioanna Georgia, I'm 22 years old and I'm from Greece. I'm living in Thessaloniki, the city where I was born to, and currently I'm completing my bachelor studies in journalism and mass media communication in the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. Also, I'm an alumni of Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung Greece and Cyprus. For me, as a student, a young person, the future of European Union should be focused on education. to make sure that all young Europeans have high quality and free education so as to make us capable and active citizens.
Sveiki, my name is Davis and I'm 21 years old. I am from Riga, the capital of Latvia. Currently I'm studying political science at the University of Latvia. For me as a Latvian, the EU is a pathway back to Europe, as we were separated from Western Europe by the Iron Curtain. And for me as a student, the future of the European Union should focus on maintaining and improving our democracies, because democracy goes hand in hand with peace.
Olá a todos, my name is Francisco, I'm from Portugal. I'll be recording this short video from my hometown, Porto Alegre, and currently I'm a master's student in political science at the Portuguese Catholic University. And for me as a young European, it is obvious that the Union is a lot close to me. I'm also a product of our open borders, of our student exchange programs, and of our comfortable liberty of circulation.
Buongiorno a tutti. My name is Alessia, I'm 26, and I come from Italy. I'm a PhD researcher in the field of political science and more precisely EU studies. I work on cross-border cooperation, multi-level governance and subsidiarity in the European Union. For me, as a researcher, the EU should support its member states in creating forward-looking education systems, while promoting European universities networks, not only for students, but also professors and researchers.
Bon dia, buenos dias. My name is Jan, I'm 25 years old. I'm from Catalonia, Spain. I'm from Cervera, but I'm currently living in Madrid and I work as a director of the Spanish European movement. For me, as a part of the Erasmus relationship, the future of the European Union should be a federal project where my children will not have to ask what country they belong to.
Dobrý den, my name is Sara Masopustova and I'm currently studying in Prague. And I work in Združení Akroman-Gemeinde. For me as a Czech and a student, the EU means huge opportunity, togetherness and a place where democracy and freedom is respected. The coronavirus pandemic proved that the cooperation is the key in facing any crisis. I wish that the EU will continue to protect its citizens, defend human rights, freedom and democracy, prove the world that peace and cooperation between the states is possible, and last but not least, will continue to make me proud of being European. As already Robert Schuman said, when it comes to the future of Europe, no effort is too much and no dream is too bold.
The last speaker once again drew the line back to the old achievements that we've seen, and this goes back to what you said, Mrs. Kinnert. I think we've heard a lot of young people who profit from what you, Mr. Pöttering, worked towards for many years. The younger generation are no longer shaped by the experience of war. The young generation is afraid of another thing, climate change, and I think very rightly so. Mrs. Kinnert, climate change as a project for EU, for Europe, what does that mean? It's a transnational project, so what would the EU have to do? I think the EU and its member states, especially Germany, are very much shaped by industrialization, and that means our economies have to be restructured in a future-oriented way to look for low resource management, and that's a big challenge for a huge economy. And then to do that for Europe, we need to look at consumer protection, infrastructure, agriculture, investment in new green startups, with biodiversity. We have a strategy for that already. But nevertheless, we all know the EU may be able to progress, but climate change is a global affair. So it's not just having a say as a continent and representing one voice. It is also about us as a society and a social economy to act in a uniform way so that other countries outside our continent will use us as a role model and not have to point at others saying you have to follow their example. No, we have to foster a sustainable market economy. Well, we have heard about social market economy thanks to Ludwig Erhard, but transformation to an ecological social market economy. What does the EU have to do, Mr. Simon? Well, we have the most ambitious targets as a continent, and very often that is being forgotten about. When it comes to CO2 emission reduction, for example, we've been rather successful as compared to 1990, the targets that we set. But of course, innovation and technology is what we need to be role models worldwide so that others will copy what we do. If we just have bans and if we just say we're going to tax everything to the extent that steel can no longer be produced in Europe, and then instead we'll buy unecological steel produced in China, then nobody's going to copy us. So as Diana said it, we have to look at innovation and technology startups. The hydrogen strategy of the federal government, for example, is also a contribution, and we need that at European level. Biodiversity has been mentioned. And if all of that can be turned into something that's equally successful as an ecological social market economy, as the social market economy that we saw before, if we can make this equally successful, then once again, us as Europeans, we will be successful and there will be others following our path. If we just have bans and if we just say you have to do without things, then nobody will follow us. And that's the political difference also between the parties. I mean, we can say it. The CDU, CSU want to look at technology and innovation, whereas the Greens want to have bans and want to forbid things and want to be even stricter. And this makes things complicated because in an international world, as a nation that's focusing on export, we need to see how can we have fair competitiveness, carbon border tax. If we have a CO2 price, if we introduce a CO2 price, then we have to see how can we make sure there's no competitive disadvantage for European countries as compared to imported goods. That's something we need to do with the WTO. And I think there is a lot that still needs to be tapped in terms of innovative potential. But I am with Mr. Pöttering and his very positive basic opinion. We will make that. You talked about innovative potential, but there is also potential for conflicts. Talk about migration, for example, and others. People keep saying climate change is not fair. It's not just. Mr. Pöttering, if we look at this long-standing topic of defense policy and foreign policy of the EU, that changes, but it doesn't become less important. So how does the EU have to restructure, maybe? Maybe I can go back to something that was said just now, which I totally agree with. The Treaty of Lisbon that came into force in December 2009 and basically forms the basic law of the European Union, sees a competitive social market economy. And us Germans, we were able to bring social market economy into a European treaty. In the 50s or 60s, this would have been impossible thanks to our past. But now it was possible to entrench the social market economy into this treaty. And now I think the task is to balance economy on the one side and ecology on the other and reconcile the two. Professor Simon mentioned different parties. It's the strength of the Christian Democratic Union to advocate for a good economy, but we are also ready to face the challenges of climate change and questions of environmental protection. And all of this is, of course, interconnected. If we look at the question of migration, that is closely linked with that of climate development. If the Earth continues to heat up, then there will be huge areas in Africa where people will no longer be able to do agriculture or live, make a living, and then they will come to us. So we need to connect all these policies, and I hope that the EU will have the power to have one joint policy towards the third world, if that's what we want to call it, to develop a joint stance towards Russia and China, talk about the big problem of human rights. We mustn't just look at material advantages and economic advantages. We have to make sure that people can claim their right to freedom. So we need a common defense and foreign policy. We can only defend our values if we do common defense policies and if we're militarily strong. And if I may add one final point, as a European, we have the Biden administration that once again gives us an opportunity in a time where the Americans confirm that they want to work with us as partners of a Western Union. I mean, what will happen if there is no longer a President Joe Biden, but someone like the president before him who wanted to withdraw Europe from NATO and us as Europeans, leaving us Europeans unprepared to defend ourselves. So we need to use this opportunity. This is my plea. We need a common foreign and defense policy. Thank you. So once again, we need to learn from the lessons of history. Mr. Simon, let's look towards the exterior a bit more. You're looking for a paradigm change towards a more world-oriented view, away from an internal view. Well, this interior focus was, based on this genial idea of Jean Monnet and Robert Schuman to connect the economies in Europe in a way that they will no longer wage war against one another. So that's this inward orientation, but we must no longer limit ourselves to that. We mentioned it before today. We are sort of in a competition of systems, and the question is our values of individual rights to freedoms, rule of law, democracy. Are we able to defend these values worldwide? And that's what I mean when I talk about a world orientation. So what areas of politics do we actually have to turn European so that we are able to act worldwide? There are two states in Europe. There are small states and there are those who know that they're small because we're all small. But if we don't act with one voice, be it economy, be it digitization, be it energy policy, be it climate protection policy, if we don't act together, then we will no longer play a role at all. And that is the knowledge that our generation needs. And that's why we need another big step, like the one Robert Schuman made, away from this internal, inward orientation. Not just for peace in Europe, we need to have a worldwide orientation. Francois Bellamy said it. We need to define European interests in the world. What are the interests of Europe in the world? And we can only define those if there are competences in those various fields and if we have a structure that makes us able to act towards the exterior.
Let me open another policy field. You talked about climate being a big driver already. Demography and digitization would be two other big drivers. Ms. Kinnert, if we try to sort of think them together, how can the EU make sure that we, who are becoming fewer and fewer on our continent, and at the same time we have more and more technical options, to become a modern future society? Well, digitization and demographic change cannot be reversed. These are irreversible trends happening, especially in Europe, and we need new concepts for them. For instance, and this can go hand in hand, we have more entire life expectancies. We have more and more older people who are physically fit, and we can use this in society. It's not about obligatory years or so. It is about diversity of age concepts. There are many older and elderly people who want to make a social contribution, who can still work and do things, and I think we need a totally different recognition and appreciation of elderly people, maybe also of widows, of single people who want recognition. And I also work on the topic of loneliness. We have the first loneliness ministry in Europe now, and it is basically about focusing on the generation 60+. In a time where they looked at industrialization, they feel a bit invisible, and we have to make them visible. We need to know that our older generation has a whole wealth of experience. And I think if we recognize this, then we can make progress. This is a big future challenge that is more specific than the idea of flying taxis. And young people, of course, also want to make sure that we have competitive jobs. They want a good economic situation. But we also know that we need digital natives in Europe. That is something between super modern capitalism and Silicon Valley and a totalitarian data system in China. So I think it is important to make sure that the member states are able to speak with one voice in Europe when it comes to digital rights and citizens' rights. Thank you very much. We are hopping back and forth between different topics. I hope this is okay, but we have different topics on our agenda. You mentioned the member states, 27 in total. Mr. Simon, we talk about unity and diversity. This is kind of a claim that is often being used. In reality, people from Düsseldorf have never been to Dresden, never mind Gdansk or Dobrich. So you developed an idea in terms of how we can get to know each other better without necessarily traveling somewhere, and thus lay a foundation and create a basis that we all feel as Europeans and perceive this as a value. I think I know what you're alluding to. So there are two specific demands that I have put up. Europe, and this is my first demand, is often accused of being a project of elites. We talked about Erasmus, etc., but we have to make sure that every European spends 6 months in another European country or another European family during their study time. It's actually easy to implement this if you have internet platforms like Airbnb, something like that. It shouldn't be expensive. I mean, Erasmus is not really an expensive project, but I think you were also alluding to something else, a European media platform. I didn't develop this idea, somebody else did it, but it has not yet been put into practice. Now, we have a nationally fragmented debate. Even today, we shed light on things from a German perspective. If you talk about democracy with a person from Croatia or Bulgaria, they talk about something totally different. They focus on the brain drain, for instance. And if we had a European media platform where European TV stations could upload something, and the European Union pays for the translations, and then it is broadcast one-to-one, so that we know a bit more about our neighbors, about the political conditions in Portugal or Denmark. We don't know anything. All we see is, okay, this is what the Iraq looks like, and this is the United States, and then it's basically done with our news world. So we have to open up our perspectives. So every comment of Donald Trump was focused on, nobody really cared. And then people start asking themselves, where am I with my European issues and problems? And I think a European media platform could actually be a solution to this. The media news from all different European countries could be pooled on this platform so everybody could watch these news. Today, this is not possible because of language barriers in Europe. And also, we have peculiarities irregularities like geo-blocking. If I'm in Brussels, for instance, I cannot watch German public television, at least not online. Awkward, and we have to change this. And the media platform would be an easy solution. Stations upload things, the European Union funds the translation, and then it can be watched in different countries. And we would know much more. Most Europeans find it probably much more interesting what is happening in European neighboring countries than in other countries that are much further away. Then we wouldn't have Lindenstraße as an export good, but the German news. Yes, that is a great idea. When talking about European democracy, we need a European public. Goes without saying. I think technocratically it cannot be installed by just clicking a button, but dissolving the geo-blocking, yeah, that would be a first technological step to make this happen. In my generation, people talk about TikTok, Instagram, social networks, and where a meme culture is very normal, where very quickly people hear about new scandals and what stars in other countries do, and people respond to this very quickly. And it becomes more and more political also amongst young people, so demands and expectations of a European young generation are changing as well. So they want to exchange ideas and news. So the demand is there, and maybe it is not necessary to install a completely new platform. Maybe existing TV stations should be asked why all correspondents are spread all over the world and not in Brussels or Strasbourg only. Well, the Europeanization that both of you sort of mentioned is, of course, very desirable. And I am pleased to hear that Mr. Simon, as a former member of the European Parliament, has a big task. Europeanization, yes, but we as Europeans must not just focus on our identity as Europeans. We should not just perceive ourselves as Europeans only. We have three political identities. It's the home, where we are at home. It is the country where we come from. Here it is Germany. And it is the European Union. And we only become EU citizens through our national citizenships and nationalities. And in order to fight nationalists and populists, I'm saying not just Europe, but I'm saying the home where we have our roots is where Germany starts and where Europe starts. Having said that, the different levels have to be considered, and also responsibility for the world must not be ruled out. And here's my recommendation, not just because it's tactically reasonable, but because it is a human need to be rooted in one's home, in one's homeland, and to be part of a national community, and at the same time be open to the European developments. I think this is one of the big challenges, not just for Germany, but for all member states of the EU, in order to fight nationalists who want to go back to the past. Sorry. We have 8 minutes left. I'm sorry. So we have to speed up a little bit and start the last round, where we would like to focus on structures. Mr. Pöttering, you are the sort of oldest European here in our panel discussion. So what has to happen, structurally speaking, so that many things that we have mentioned here can be put into practice? What can be streamlined? Well, we now focus on the conference on the future of Europe. Let's wait and see what proposals and recommendations we will see from individuals, from organizations, etc. So we have to pool them, and then we have to analyze them and set up a structure. Will we have another convention where the European Parliament is represented, where the national parliaments are represented? And I would urgently ask you, and Norbert Lammert, as former president of the German Bundestag, knows that we have cooperated very well, European Parliament and national parliaments, German Bundestag. So the national parliaments, when it comes to amendments to agreements, have to put this into practice at the end of the day. And I think we have to make a big step based on our experience with the corona pandemic. think, and Ursula von der Leyen also mentioned it, that we create a health union. There is a center for disease control, yes, but this center has hardly any responsibilities. They depend on getting information from the national levels and governments. Often this information is not provided. So we need specific steps in terms of how we can create an effective health union. Other areas remain important: climate protection, digitization, and of course a common foreign security and defense policy. Now, Ms. Kinnert, you are very well in thinking in systems. This colours of 27 nations in one association, in one union. How would you set up an agile structure? So what would you change? Which screws would you turn, so to speak? Well, I think we cannot do the same things in all 27 member states. If you have supranational projects in certain countries, it is okay. They can go ahead, and that can be an incentive for other countries if they see that there are promising projects happening. It has something to do with the media platform again. I'm thinking of Arte TV station. It is a Franco-German TV station. If that works, then a Portuguese-Finnish Erasmus cooperation can also work with companies. I think we have to open to this. Not everything has to come from Brussels and Strasbourg. In the political world, it is also about smaller initiatives. And that could mean that in a pool of 500 million citizens, that are the most creative and diverse pool when it comes to startup ideas, that we have common ideas that are not always commanded from and in Brussels.
Mr. Simon, well, I don't think you can give orders from Brussels exactly where Europeans fell behind, right? Well, we did fall behind when it came to digital platforms. Google, Apple, Facebook are in the West, Alibaba, Huawei, and Tencent in the East, and the Europeans have nothing. But what you mentioned were structures, first and foremost, and I think we need to do more for this, and this is not going to happen overnight. We need a European public. The President of the Parliament has taken up something my colleagues and I have talked about. We need to have this platform become the center of public attention. And there are smaller reforms, but we need to have debates. We don't want to have this one soup that is consensus, all in the resolutions as well, that we vote after a debate. That I think the core is that democratic legitimization needs to be strengthened, because people can choose, people can vote, but they can also vote someone out or off. And that's something we've seen in the United States. They voted for a president and now they de-voted him or unelected him. And if the executive of the European Union, if our impression is that they didn't really communicate well or work well with the vaccination campaign, then they want to have the opportunity to unelect this government. And I think we have a sort of diffusion of responsibilities. Maybe there wasn't a mistake that was made, but we didn't discuss this. And when we look at the Commission and how it's structured at the moment, the European Parliament has become stronger with the Lisbon Treaty. The commissioners are more democratically legitimized than ministers before. But the Commission President, should he or she be directly voted for? What about the individual commissioners? Should they be named by the individual governments? That kind of makes it very hazy to know who's responsible and where can I unelect something or someone. That's the characteristic of the democratic system that the European Union somewhat lacks also when it comes to European elections. And I think that would make these elections more attractive. But I think we can't stop on unelect someone. So let me come back to the crucial question that Mr. Lammert asked in the beginning. How do you judge the willingness within the EU to change? There are surveys that point towards a majority of citizens in the countries of the European Union want joint action. And that means they want change, that there is political will of the parliaments, the national parliaments, the European parliaments, of the Commission. They all want to act together, and I think that is a big encouragement for political decision makers. I am a big fan of representative democracy. We send representatives to the parliaments, but they also have to keep listening to the people, and that is what this conference on the future of Europe is all about, to hear what people want, and we need to draw our conclusions, and that needs to lead to more togetherness, to more unity in diversity. We do not want a European melting pot. We've seen all those beautiful cities, Prague, Helsinki, Rome, others, Paris, Berlin. We want to maintain this cultural diversity, but at the same time we want to create a European sovereignty. That means that the countries of the European Union can act together, and at a lower level, below the European level, we have national, regional and communal action that will still be possible in the future. That is what I'm hoping for when I think of the future of Europe. So you are willing to change, Mr. Pöttering. Thank you. Mr. Simon. It sounds a bit like I know it all. The Europeans don't want unity in diversity. They want to be united in diversity. And that's this small difference to the United States. And I think we need to take this more seriously. The colleague from France mentioned it. If nowadays I am asking for a European army, then France will be against it. But if I say it cannot be right that we have to invent everything 27 times, that we procure everything 27 times, that when it comes to cybersecurity, where we have a joint interest, that we cannot create added value, I think that's the approach we have to take. And if we do that, then I am sure that there will be a huge willingness to cooperate more. Thank you. Ms. Kinnert, because of your age, but because of your hat maybe as well, you bring fresh wind into old structures. How do you see and experience the EU? Is this a cosmos or a structure that wants to change, that is willing to change and ready to change? Well, I think it has to change if it wants the approval of a younger generation, and especially when I talk to people who are nowhere near the elites or politics, that they hardly deal with the institutions of EU, but legitimization of output is important to them. Whether we talk about sustainability of technology, whether the EU fosters that for us and promotes that for us, and whether that is reflected in our everyday life. It's about sustainability, about mental health, for example, something that's always underestimated. Demographic change, new aging concepts, but also topics such as human rights and European values that we have to defend from within the European Union. A lot of young people know feminists from social media networks who took to the streets on Christopher Street Day or during the Arab Spring all over the world, and that's what unites them all, and that's why they say the European Union is important. Thank you very much for three very different perspectives to all of you, and thank you, dear guests, for being interested in our topic. I hope that our discussion has kindled your interest in further shaping Europe in the scope of the conference on the future of Europe. From what I understand, everyone can take part in this. And I would also like to remind you of the young parliamentarian from France who seems to have fans here, Francois-Xavier Bellamy. It's a beautiful name as well. And what he's wishing for is a Europe where we can strengthen each other, where we can go on writing our own national histories, but not just looking at history happening to us, but actually shaping it. And that's, I think, what this conference is about. Enjoy writing history, enjoy making history, and stay healthy.